This is Free to Exchange, the show where free-thinking scholars, free markets, and ironically, free public television all meet. I'm Ben Powell, your host. Today, we're truly going to do some free thinking on a topic that will seem radical to most viewers, the organ transplant shortage. Each day, an average of 79 people receive organ transplants, but each day, an average of 18 people die while waiting for a transplant that can't take place because of the shortage of organs donated. I'm an economist. When I hear shortage, that means one thing: price is too low. In the case of human organs, their price is zero because the government prohibits us from selling them at all. The result? We don't get enough donations and people die. Why not just legalize a market in transplant organs to increase the supply and save lives? To consider this question today, I have a philosopher who specializes in bioethics joining us. Then we'll talk with a medical doctor who treats organ donors and transplant recipients. My first guest is James Stacey Taylor, an associate professor of philosophy at the College of New Jersey. He's been labeled a heretic by the London Times because he favored creating a free market in human transplant organs in his book, Steaks and Kidneys. Seriously, I kid you not, that is the title. Of course, it's spelled S-T-A-K-E-S, not steaks like you eat. Subtitle is Why Markets in Human Body Parts Are Morally Imperative. James, welcome. Let's start there. Why is it imperative to have a market in body parts?
I think it's imperative for the reason you noted. People are dying. We don't have enough organs to go around, and we've got a price cap of 0. And so if we release that price cap and allow people to be paid, we'll get many more organs coming in. It's just like hamburgers. So McDonald's has had billions and billions served because they're able to charge a price for their burgers. If the government steps in and says, McDonald's, no price, you can't charge anything for your burgers, maybe we'll get 1 or 2. People like me who will be altruistic might give away burgers, but there won't be billions and billions served. There'll be about 12 or 15. Kidneys, I think, are exactly the same. Release the price cap, we get more kidneys, and we get people to live. That's a good thing.
But most people watching this show probably think that this sounds disgusting. What do you say to them?
I think that they need to think a little bit more carefully about it. Because when we're talking about buying and selling kidneys, we're really just talking about buying and selling just another commodity, like burgers or candy. Since we allow people to buy and sell things that they hold dear to them, their Aunt Ethel's watch, why not allow them to sell a kidney? In fact, selling a kidney is even better than selling Aunt Ethel's watch because it saves somebody's life. And besides, it makes the kidney seller better off too. This is a win-win situation. And it just puzzles me as to why it's not allowed. That's crazy.
So some people will think it's not a win-win situation. They're going to say, well, sure, okay, somebody gets the organ, they get to live, but it's not going to be Bill Gates who sells his kidney. It's going to be these poor people in poor parts of the world who are just hawking body parts, and that's horrible. What do you say to them?
I say part of it is horrible because they're selling their body parts because they're in absolute poverty. Poverty is the problem, not kidney markets. There's actually 3 possibilities that we could have here, Ben. We could prohibit kidney markets, as we do now, and poverty remains the same. That's the worst possible situation. They're in poverty and they can't find a way out. We could eradicate poverty at a stroke. If anybody's got a magic way for doing that, I would be all in favor of that. That would be wonderful. Or we could do the sensible middle ground. We could work to eradicate poverty, maybe by opening up borders, removing trade restrictions, allowing people to seek employment where they wish, and allow them to sell their kidneys. That, I think, is the sensible approach to take at the moment.
Yeah, because it means something, right? If they're going to sell their kidney, they're demonstrating that, in their mind, they'd rather have the money because it alleviates other parts of this dire poverty they're stuck in, and that's more important than the other kidney.
Absolutely, and we've got really good empirical evidence of this too. A man called Madhav Goyal did a survey of what happens to people in India who sell their kidneys. Now, they're selling on the black market, so the conclusions that he drew are bad things tend to happen, as would expect from an illegal black market run by people like Vito Corleone, the Indian version. That's going to be bad. We know that. But what's fascinating about this is only 300 or so people in Madras, India, Chennai as it's now called, sold their kidney that he could find out of a teeming hundreds of thousands of impoverished people. What this tells me is people aren't being forced to sell like you and me. They're sitting there, they're making their decisions, and a tiny proportion are deciding to sell their kidney because they think it's in their best interest to do so. I think it's awful for, say, wealthy, middle-class, white legislators to go to India and say, you can't make the decision that you want because we know better. That's horrible.
Yeah, so most people have it exactly backwards. They think the person who gets the kidney wins, the other person has somehow been exploited. But what you're saying is they become much better off too.
Oh, both people win. It's wonderful.
It's kind of like normal trade.
It is. It's just another example of how trade lifts all boats and makes everybody better off. And what's really bizarre in some of the bioethics literature is once people realize that trade does make both people better off and the poor really are not being exploited, then they suddenly say, but look, these poor people with these 2 healthy kidneys, they're going to gouge the rich and get as much as they can and exploit the rich. That tells me...
This is not an objection I've heard to organ markets, James.
It's an objection I've heard.
Yeah.
And it's just bizarre. It's almost as if they're scrambling around trying to find an objection that will resonate with people, really realizing that organ markets should be allowed.
Now, I was looking up some of the medical community who's opposed to this, and I found a guy from Harvard Medical School, Dr. Delmonico. Actually, I just realized, is that where you got the name for your book, Steaks and Kidneys? It was a jab at the Delmonico steak guy? Yeah.
In part, yeah.
In part, really? That's awesome. So anyway, what he says, it's just a fundamental ethical principle. Selling one's kidney or any other part of one's body violates the dignity of the human person. What do you say to him?
That's crazy. It's just insane. Because what I think violates the dignity of a human person is going to somebody who's in a very different economic situation than you. I'm sure that a professor of medicine at Harvard is not in the same position as an impoverished Chennai would-be kidney seller. Going to them and saying, I know better than you. It's almost like you're treating them as though they're little children. We know better, we're going to tell you what you can do and what you can't do for your own good. Now, we know that you really want to sell a kidney so that you can pay your debts or feed your family or maybe send your child to college. But we're not going to let you because it violates your dignity. What's the real violation of dignity is going to somebody else and not letting them do what they want and not letting them do something that is ethical, helps them, and saves a life. That's horrible.
Okay, I think that makes a lot of sense. What about the fear? This is another fear I've heard people bring up. Is, well, you know, if you had a market in kidneys, they're just going to have organ theft. They're going to steal it. And in fact, you know, the TV show South Park, the kind of comic off-color cartoon, they actually had an episode where he had to wear Kidney Blocker 2000 because he wouldn't voluntarily donate his kidney. He was worried his friends were going to come cut it out at night and take it from him.
I think that's crazy. And it's a fundamental misunderstanding as to how markets work. So if you or I need a kidney, we'll imagine that you've got a legal market. We'll go to a hospital, and the hospital will know the provenance of that kidney. They will know where it's come from. They will have it tracked from a moment of extraction to when it comes to where it's been transplanted. That's how markets function, because a hospital isn't going to start buying backstreet kidneys that have been stolen from somebody. That would be crazy. That hospital would be out of business. It would be in serious legal problems. There would be an outcry about this. In fact, if there is any kidney theft, and I'm not convinced that there is, it's a product of illegal markets, prohibiting the market and forcing it underground, where if you're desperate and you go to India to receive a kidney, maybe you won't ask too carefully about where the kidney came from, because you're already dealing with an illegal transaction. If you want to eliminate kidney theft and the horrors of the black market, you legalize.
Well, what you're saying makes a lot of sense to me, and I wonder how it's resonating with our viewers. I think some of you might be thinking like, okay, so this economist and this philosopher, they think a market in organs is a good idea. But if you're like my father, you might also be thinking, these two guys might be doctors, but they're not the type of doctors who help people. What do they know? Well, joining us next is a real doctor from Texas Tech's Health Sciences Center to weigh in on our topic. Stick around.
Free to Exchange is a joint project of Texas Tech's Free Market Institute and Texas Tech Public Media. More information is available at fmi.ttu.edu.
PBS has always played a big part in my being a good citizen. When the Watergate hearings began, PBS was thoughtful enough to re-air them at night. So it was a great service to all of us who were busy with children during the day. Frontline, the News Hour. I really love Washington Week. I trust the news programs on PBS. I decided to do a planned gift because I want to ensure that PBS will be around for my grandchildren and hopefully great-grandchildren. I would hope that others, when doing their estate planning, would include their PBS station. My PBS station is part of my community. That's something I really value.
Welcome back. Still with me is Professor James Stacey Taylor, and now joining us is Dr. Gilbert Berdine. Dr. Berdine is Associate Professor of Medicine at Texas Tech University's Health Sciences Center. He's the author of numerous scientific journal articles, and he's frequently been a treating physician for organ donors and transplant recipients. Gilbert, welcome.
Thank you.
So, to start off with, what I left the guests with before we went into break, are James and I crazy? So we're an economist and a philosopher, we're talking about this stuff. You're actually a medical doctor. Does any of this make sense to you?
Yes, it not only makes sense, but I have a lot of trouble with the other side of the position. I think the mainstream position is the position that does not make any sense and is very difficult to defend.
So what you're referring to as the mainstream position is what people in society probably think we shouldn't have a market, and you're calling that also the mainstream position within your profession?
Well, bear in mind, it is illegal in the United States to sell organs. So by mainstream, it's against the law. I think if everybody thought about this correctly, the law would be repealed and a market would be available for the selling of organs, particularly organs such as kidneys. So the mainstream, yeah. The medical community varies from being overtly hostile to the idea of a market for organs to being somewhat warm to it. The nephrologists, the kidney specialists, these are the doctors who are taking care of dialysis patients who are trying to find transplants for people with end-stage renal disease. And these are the doctors who are frustrated by the lack of organs. And they seem to be warming to the idea of opening a market for kidneys.
How bad is the lack of organs? I know kidneys is the most severe shortage. Do we see shortages in other markets too, or in other potential markets as well?
Well, there are always shortages when the price is below whatever the natural price would be. It's just how is the shortage manifest. You have to realize that there are different types of organ markets. The kidney is the most common transplant, and it's the one that I think we're really talking about. You have other organs, lung and heart, that can only come from deceased donors. That's a completely different situation. You have bone marrow, which is a renewable resource like blood, but the market is extremely small because very few patients require bone marrow transplant. The kidney market is very large because of the very large number of people that have end-stage renal disease and will die without some kind of support. And if you look at the statistics on outcome on dialysis, they're just much worse than what your outcome is following a transplant. So it's clearly a better life if you get the transplant, but there's a huge shortage of donors compared to recipients.
So if I understand, the reason we can't just so we have a shortage, but we do get people who die and donate organs, but people just can't wait indefinitely because their life expectancy on dialysis is much lower?
Right. And well, to give you some idea of the numbers, in 2011, there were roughly 83,000 people on the list for a kidney transplant. And about 10 to 11,000 received a transplant from a deceased donor. Slightly under 5,000 received a transplant from a living donor. And slightly over 5,000 died while they were on the transplant list. In addition, between 1,000 and 2,000 people went from being on the transplant list to going off the transplant list because they were too ill to undergo the rigors of the procedure. Mm-hmm. The longer you're on the list, the worse your health becomes, and your other problems make it impossible for you to have the procedure. So time is your worst enemy.
Okay. Now, we've been saying the word the market for kidneys. There is, James, there is kind of a market in kidneys right now, a kind of weird one in the US, isn't there? Like a barter market.
Yes, so you can have matched donation. So if you need a kidney and your spouse isn't a match, I need a kidney and my spouse isn't a match, but our spouses are matches for us. That is, our respective spouses are matches for the other person. Mm-hmm. Then we can get together and your spouse can provide a kidney to me, my spouse can provide a kidney to you.
So I'm an economist. This sounds really inefficient. We don't trade our other goods like that. I don't go around and say, I've got James's book to trade. I need to find somebody who has something that I want to swap for it. I just sell it for money, then I use the money to buy whatever else I want. Mm-hmm. But here we call it barter in economics, right? Does this work very well in the kidney market, Dr. Berdine?
No, it's not working well. And the disparity between the people who are on the list for a kidney transplant and the available donors is widening. All the numbers are going in the wrong direction, and all the programs they've tried to institute to induce people to donate are failing. The market is the only thing that will solve this problem. And you want it to be a free market to get rid of the criminal elements, which are really causing the big problems.
Now, is there a place in the world today where they allow a legal market in organs?
Yes.
Yes,
would either of you like to? This isn't a yes/no question. You can tell me about it.
Yes, and it's the sort of what we might call the true bastion of freedom, the bright shining light of individualism. Turns out to be Iran.
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 Oh boy.
And Iran is wonderful because
you heard it here first, people. Iran is wonderful.
Iran is wonderful because, at least with respect to kidneys.
Okay.
Because they legalized a market in 1988. And in 1988, they had exactly the same problems as every other country in the world. They had a huge chronic shortfall of kidneys. By the year 2000, they had no shortfall of kidneys. If you needed a kidney, you were an Iranian citizen, and being honest, if you had the wherewithal to get medical attention of that quality in Iran, you have to be fair about this. Not everybody's getting a kidney in Iran. But if you have the wherewithal to get it, you were much better off being Iranian and having end-stage renal disease than you were, say, living in Palo Alto, California with end-stage renal disease. And now there's another waiting list in Iran, but it's a waiting list that goes the other way. It's a waiting list of people who put themselves down as potential kidney vendors. That's spectacular.
They have an oversupply.
They have an oversupply of kidneys.
So how do they determine price then? So this makes me suspicious that the government's doing something funky with the price if they have an oversupply.
They are doing something funky with the price. So you get a set amount for giving up a kidney, which I believe is around $1,200 US, which is a lot if you're impoverished in Iran. Mm-hmm. And then you can also negotiate, I believe, with the potential recipient for additional funds.
Okay. And from a medical standpoint, do you hear horror stories coming out of Iran that this market's failing or not working as well? Or?
Well, no, but I, from a medical standpoint, I don't know that what's going on in Iran is going to persuade or dissuade people here. I mean, they have their own arguments. The arguments are largely ethical ones. I don't agree with them, but some people are just viewing that transaction in body parts is somehow tainted. Now, as James has pointed out, they're perfectly okay with swaps. So part for part is okay. You're receiving exactly the same thing that you donated, but somehow introducing money into the equation seems to make this an evil enterprise in the minds of some people. And I don't understand that. Dr. Delmonico, the physician you quoted in the earlier segment, has no problem at all at compensating a donor for expenses incurred in the process of donating. But the way you compensate can take many forms, and you don't even know what all the possible problems are going to be. My first week at Texas Tech, when I first joined the faculty, one of my first clinic days, I was referred a kidney donor. She was 2 weeks from donating her kidney, and she was referred for shortness of breath and chest pain, and we diagnosed pulmonary embolism. She had to be hospitalized, and she had to take medication for a protracted period of time, and it was a potentially life-threatening illness. So there are risks associated with the donation process. And the same people who are saying, well, it's perfectly okay to compensate the donors for these things, but they can't get a monetary incentive for doing it. Well, we pay all sorts of people a monetary incentive to take risks. We pay firefighters, we pay policemen, we pay soldiers, we pay iron workers, we pay all sorts of people an incentive to get them to take risks that other people don't want to take.
That's a great point, is that we do this for all sorts of professions. And this is why fishermen, if you watch Deadliest Catch on TV or whatever, they make good money because it's a very dangerous line of work. And how would we put a price on it? So what the community's allowing now is they'll say, okay, you can get reimbursed for the expenses of your lost work time or something like, but they won't let us price risk. And how could we get a price for that anyway? It's not an objective number, is it?
No.
It's got to be a risk in their mind of, is it worth taking the risk to give this organ, right?
Right. Well, one, the risk is uncertain, but two, the desire to have compensation now in the immediate present is different from what you're willing to take down the road. And some people, because of their circumstances, want a benefit now as opposed to some unknown benefit in the future. This is the whole concept of interest rates.
So some economists have studied this, and they've tried to guess about how big that compensation would have to be in order to declare the kidney market in the United States, so to speak. What's the rough price estimate of? Is this going to cost $1 million per kidney, or is this going to be $100?
No, I mean, the estimates I've seen are $15,000 to $25,000 per kidney. I don't know if I agree with those estimates,
sure.
But that's the starting. That's a ballpark. That's the starting figure. And of course, if it's a voluntary system, if you don't think $25,000 is worth it, you don't do it. No one is going to force you to do it.
Right.
The issue, you discussed the issue, well, what about stealing kidneys and what about killing people for their kidneys? Well, if you're a recipient, if you're a wealthy recipient waiting for this kidney, you want to know where that kidney came from. One of the biggest factors on determining how long your transplant will function as a kidney and how long you will live is the health and the age of your kidney. So you want to know exactly where it came from. And
so there actually might not be a market price of $15,000 for kidneys. It's going to be grades just like you buy grades of other products.
If the market is allowed to develop, you will see higher prices for younger kidneys. So I don't think we will be getting into children because there are problems with children that you don't see with adults. But an 18-year-old is going to have a more valuable kidney than a 60-year-old.
So we're starting to run a little bit short on time, but I want to get a comparison then. So if we're in this, we'll say ballpark of $15,000 to $25,000, right now people on dialysis, it costs money to treat them, and the average wait time for a kidney is about 4.5 years. What's the cost of dialysis compared to a potential organ bought?
Well, the numbers I've seen are something like $80,000 a year for dialysis.
So we're dealing with about $300,000 worth of your average person on the transplant wait list of dialysis treatment versus, so basically money wouldn't be a problem for solving this in the United States.
No, I don't think money is going to be the issue. The issue is going to be overcoming an ethical inertia. And I think we're going to have to do a much better job of explaining that it is not slavery to allow someone to be paid for their kidney. It is slavery to deny them that opportunity.
All right. Well, Dr. Berdine, Dr. Taylor, thank you both for joining me. There's nearly 100,000 people on the kidney wait list. A decade ago, it was almost half of that. The list is getting longer, and each year, thousands of people are dying while waiting. If you're like most people, you might feel uncomfortable with the idea of people trading body parts for money. But I don't know about you, I feel a lot less comfortable with people dying every year than witnessing some people trade an organ that saves someone's life. I hope you'll think about this. Until next time, I'm Ben Powell.